Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, racial quotas in South African sport teams. How important is racial balance, or is talent the only thing that matters? So I have just come back from Joburg, South Africa. This is a conversation I've been having with my mates in South Africa, white South Africans and black South Africans. What is our community saying?
I'm interested to hear what that conversation sounds like based on our community members. Now, as you know, Femi, of course, every morning we ask our community this question. What stories are breaking where you are? And we actually got a response from Duncan, and it's the inspiration from this show. Duncan wrote us that he wanted to see a show on the racial quotas. Now, just like Duncan, you too can be part of this live conversation. Just tweet us your thoughts, your questions, comments with hashtag AJStream.
I'm Robert Adams, sports presenter at Al Jazeera, and I'm in the stream.
In sport, what matters most? Racial balance on the team or the best talent possible, regardless of race? It's a debate that started up again in South Africa after the sports minister, Fikile Mbalula, announced that teams must now field 60% black players or lose government support and funding and be banned from competition. His decision, which is to be implemented immediately, came after an independent report concluded that there's been slow progress in the racial transformation of South African sports. Now, previously, all teams had to follow a 50-50 quota system, but will a 60-40 quota now help develop new players and transform leagues? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Clive Rice. He's a former captain of South Africa's international cricket team. Somodada Fikeni is chairman of the Eminent Persons Group. He's working to assess the status of transformation and provide advice to the Department of Sports. And Kali Kriel is CEO of AfriForum. That's an NGO working to protect South Africa's minorities. Gentlemen, how's it?
Well, I'm happy to be part of your program.
It's good to have you here. Good evening to you all. So, the idea of sport is the best of the best competing. So where does the idea of racial quotas come into that idea that your national team for cricket or rugby or athletics or netball should be broken up into quotas? So Madada, what's the case for that?
You'll remember that South Africa went through colonialism and went through apartheid, which was described by the United Nations as a crime against humanity. That particular system or regime excluded blacks from every sphere of life, including sports. And that is what led to sports boycott by many nations which campaigned against apartheid. Now, as part of a post-apartheid South Africa, in trying to bring diversity that reflects our demography, sports is affected by that transformation process. And I dare say that when we say there ought to be a target where racial diversity is reflected, at no time does it ever suggest that you leave behind talent.
Right.
It would be vulgarizing the notion of diversity. Here we're talking of some best players who have proven themselves, some even playing internationally, who simply do not make it to the national teams. And some of them, when there is pressure, they make it to the national teams. They warm the benches throughout.
Right.
And here we're talking of talent that is already there.
Right.
Yes.
So,
And that's when now you do have issue of saying, let's have diversity.
right. Okay. Let me just bring in Clive here. Clive, Somodada was mentioning the time during apartheid where when you were playing cricket, a lot of countries wouldn't play you because of apartheid. So this is sort of like a make good many years later. Does what Somodada, does that resonate with you? Do you feel he's got a good point to make here?
You know what? I think that when I was playing, okay, I was never allowed to play a single test match. So apartheid affected me a great deal as well in terms of my cricket career. But going forward, you've got to. What we've got to have in South Africa is you've got to have the best guys at the top playing. If you've got losing teams, you can't, you're going nowhere with a losing team because no one wants to identify with it. So you've got to have the best. In South Africa, if you're black or white and you're good and you're playing in the teams, you automatically earn the respect of everybody. And I'm afraid in sport, you earn your respect with the person you're playing against. And the same applies to that person with you. And until we have a situation where there are no quotas and people are earning their respect with one another, black or white, doesn't matter, on your talent as a player, then you start getting teams that can play. If you're putting people into a side because of a quota, believe me, he's not a street fighter. He's got there too easy. And when he's got there too easy, then they talk about chokers. Those are chokers that you're developing. And I'm afraid in sport, as a sportsman, no one wants to be associated with a choker. No one gets respect as a choker. And on that basis, your whole sporting development and program then fails because of exactly that.
So, Clive, here I'm looking at the South African cricket team here. Are there any chokers on this team?
Well, they've managed to choke in a couple of the World Cups because of a quota system where they've been playing in. I want to see street fighters out there. And I mean out-and-out street fighters. That everyone in that side has had to fight and fight very hard to get his place in every team that he's come into and got into. Not just you've got to have a 50% quota, and that's what they're trying to pick, and people aren't getting selected on that basis because of that, and people are being selected for exactly that reason.
Well, Femi, on this topic of talent versus race, as soon as we started the conversation today, the live tweets have been rolling in. People actually have a lot to say on this. So, Kali, I want to bring you in here. There's just some thoughts here. Ronnie on Twitter says, when I watch a match, I don't look at race, I look at talent. Another person, Afrikaan, writes, we already suck at soccer. This is a South African speaking. Oh. Now they want us to lose rugby and cricket as well. So, Kali, what's the thinking behind this sentiment that the country will lose if they institute this quota?
Well, the country won't lose when we have talented black players, and there are many of them. The country will lose if you're going to have a system that does not provide for the choosing of the best players in all circumstances. And what I see the sentiment in the Twitter that was sent is people support the green and gold. For those around the world that don't know that, that's our national colors of our national teams. They don't support black and white. But that is, of course, for the sport-loving public. Unfortunately, we have a government that after the Mandela era has turned its back on the politics of reconciliation and has become totally preoccupied with race. As I've said previously in the pre-show, that in 1995, when South Africa won the World Cup, Chester Williams was the only black player in that team, but it united the country, and that was in the Mandela era. But now we have a new ANC that says a white can't represent the country, that is preoccupied with race, and that unfortunately creates a situation where certain sports people are seen as second-class citizens, or as the ANC refers to whites in their policy documents as colonialists of a special type. And we would want to see a situation where white players can also represent the country, and if a team that no politician should say there are too many whites in this team. If you look at the USA, for instance, the basketball team is more or less the majority of players are black. That's not in line with the demographics of the United States. But that team has the support of the country because those players are not seen as second-class citizens. They are seen as Americans that represent their country. And whites, Afrikaners, and all people in this country should be able to represent the country and not be said, there are too many of you in this team. We must be preoccupied with race and bring in black people irrespective of merit. I say if we choose on merit, there are enough black players that would make the team.
See, Kali, I remember that 1995 World Cup, and it was an amazing time for South Africa. I remember Chester Williams as well. But I'm just thinking, if you have a country where they're 80% black, 9% coloured, 9% white and 2% Indian, roughly.
Actually,
Why
it's
would there
92% black.
Why would there only be one black player on your national team?
Well, I think there's an agreement that we must broaden the playing base of all sports, including rugby. And if the playing base is broadened, then of course the demographics will change naturally. And previous to 1995, there has not been a great effort to broaden the playing base. So what we are saying,
Kali, tell us what efforts have been made.
Well, what we've seen now is that there has been sport federations that are trying to develop in poor and rural communities. But the big failure here, unfortunately, is government, because government is in control of the schooling system. We have 80% of schools in this country that are dysfunctional, and that is where my children and many children that have opportunities get access to sport is through the schooling system. But because the current government has failed to make schools functional, you have many children in townships and in rural areas that don't even get education at school. Teachers are only there through a study says 3.5 hours per day. So if the minister wants to point fingers, he must point the fingers to his own government that has failed through the schooling system. He must point fingers to their own local governments who should provide sporting facilities that don't do so. But now the minister tries to hide government's own failure by bringing in artificial numbers at the top, which is an effort to sweep government's failure under the carpet.
Right. You mentioned the current ANC administration. We literally had, sitting in our Johannesburg studio until a few minutes ago, the Minister of Sport, Fikile Mbalala, and he declined to actually take part in this discussion. We're really disappointed about this. We've had him on board for the last couple of days. I don't know why he didn't want to debate this issue, but there is a debate to be had. So let me go back to Somadoda and about this whole idea of quotas. There was already a 50-50 quota. Why didn't that work? 50% black, 50% white on the national teams. Why didn't that work?
Let me start by saying that the census have shown that blacks are 92%. Now, when you're saying let's target 50%, you are already saying even the 8% of the whites in the country can actually represent the country on the basis of 50% with talent. If that is not a huge concession given the history of South Africa, why did this not work? It's based on two things. The first one, the resistance of some of the federations to any form of transformation, because they wanted to preserve in all forms and disguises the racial composition of the teams. That's why for them the mindset is that it's easy to vulgarize. Any inclusion of a black person is often seen as lowering the standards. And yet, can you imagine a New Zealand without the Maoris? And again, the second failure came through the transitional period. The school system seemed not to have prioritized the sports. So to that extent, the government ought to have played a greater part in terms of making sure that you do have good sports in schools. Some of the historically white schools tend to insist on your cricket and rugby with no soccer and with no other sports codes. And that itself is also another challenge. The facilities. If you drive in South Africa, you find that the suburbs, which were formerly white, will have these massive sports facilities, and the township next door has nothing whatsoever. So I do not know when Clive says that the team chokes because of quota. I'm not so sure that is the case. It's actually a misunderstanding, because even where you are told that there should be a target of 50%, now 60%, which the minister and the MECs of the provinces have mentioned. It's each federation coming forward to say, we can achieve this particular 60% over a certain period. We can achieve this 60% with the following kind of assistance. That's a kind of discussion which I think is quite positive in a way.
So, Madoda, I want to give Clive a chance to respond to what you just said.
I want to just tell you something.
Clive, as you're responding, though, I do want to bring in what people online are saying, and they're calling this out very blatantly, very clearly. They say this is racism. Chris says one can try to justify this any way you like. It's simple racism and South Africa. Another person uses that same term, and he says this quota system is destroying the dreams of young, talented South Africans who won't be picked because of their race. Is this racism?
No, I quite agree. I quite agree with all that. And I'll tell you why. Because I don't think people that we've got involved in the sports and things like that understand what it's like being a sportsman. Now, I've been a sportsman. I've been up through the ranks. I've had to fight my way all the way up. Understand what it's like when I get into a team that I'm now a street fighter in that side, and I'm not giving up my position, the fact that I've been selected. And that is the nature of sport. I'm afraid we've got too many people that don't know anything about sport running the sport in South Africa and understanding the psychology of what the sportsman wants and what the sportsman need.
So, Madoda, what were you saying?
That would be an assumption. Take Makai Antini, he has complained about racism. This is a star player who has proven himself. Take Brian Habana, he has complained about racism. Here we're talking about professional sports people who feel marginalized even when they are participating. So why don't you have in your program black sports people saying, no, we do not want quota, it doesn't work for us. Boxers, cricket players, rugby players who have gone throughout and proved themselves.
Okay, so let Clive respond to that.
The issue.
So, Madoda, let Clive respond. Clive?
You know what? When I see that what you're saying there, where they're complaining about whatever it is, maybe that suits them to do that in terms of the politics in South Africa as to what goes on. But down the line, when I was running the National Academy and I was given a quota player to come and play in the National Academy, and he was a quota player, and suddenly he's up against the fast bowlers where he's out of his depth. It'd be like the three of us being put in the boxing academy and we're up against the heavyweights. And we're getting hit all over the place. We're not enjoying it. Our confidence is gone. Do we want to carry on afterwards? No, we don't. How many of the quota players that have been put into teams over the last 20 years are still playing the sports where they got into teams?
So, Madoda?
Not too many.
So, Madoda, go ahead.
Are you saying that Habana, Makayantin, who are recognized internationally, are actually quota players? The best way to preserve...
No, I'm not saying they're quota players. They're good enough to be there and proved it.
I'm saying
can I just come in here?
All right, gentlemen, Clive and so Madoda, let me just let Callie into the conversation. So, Madoda, just take a breath for a moment. Callie, go ahead.
We're not saying, or if I speak on my own behalf, but also what I'm hearing from Clive is we're not saying that Brian Habana is a quota player. The people that are saying Brian Habana is a quota player is Samadoda and people like the minister. I've never seen anywhere that Brian Habana has complained about racism. What I did see Brian Habana complaining about is that him being branded as a quota player. And that is unfortunate because talented black, colored and Indian athletes in our country are being harmed by the fact if they are chosen, they are branded as quota players simply because of the system that the minister and Samadoda now wants to enforce. We must say that there are very talented black players. They are chosen on merit, and I've been to numerous rugby matches where Brian Habana has played, and he's been the hero of the crowd. And even the crowd, the large parts of the white people in the crowd. So where Samadoda comes with his racism complaints, I don't know.
All right.
That's not what I've heard from Brian Habana.
Okay, so gentlemen, I hear about this. It's almost like quota players and an insult now in the international sports world for South Africa. Gentlemen, just take a pause for a moment. Let's just jump into the community. Malika.
Well, you know how we like solutions. Our community is suggesting a few of them, and we'll see if they can work. Yumna on Twitter says, how can the government expect to increase the number of black athletes if there's absolutely no sports training provided educated in government schools. And Kali, that's something you mentioned. There's also a video comment here from one of our own. Have a listen to this.
Robert Adams, sports presenter at Al Jazeera. I'm from South Africa, so the topic you're touching on today is actually something that's very close to me. I know that we're talking about overhauling not overhauling, but introducing race-based quotas in the national teams, ostensibly to reflect the demographic of South Africa. But the more pertinent question is, why are we not developing young black players across cricket, rugby and football?
So Somadoda, I will address that to you. Is there enough being done to develop young players in the townships, per se?
If anybody like Katli Kriel and Clive read the report very carefully, the issue of quota and target is just one of many variables. The report emphasizes on developing sports in communities and schools. And it says government should do more because you must have quality and you must have success. We even rate the issue of those teams succeeding internationally because we say it's not only access, but it's also success in sports. You'll never run any successful sports without success.
All right.
And we also raise another thing, which I think is very important.
Okay.
That in soccer, we are complaining about the dwindling number of whites in South Africa. And we say something should be done so that more whites are brought back into football. But Kali Kriel, because of his obsession with preserving and protecting, the white minority rights, wouldn't even recognize that part where we are saying we should do more, even in these quotas.
All right,
to
so
have
let me just show.
whites
This is a sporting show, and I want to see some athletes and sporting men on the show. Have a look at my laptop. This is the South African cricket team, under 19, and look at the diversity in this team. Young men, talented men, and I think this is a picture that the Minister of Sport would be quite happy with. So, Clive, how did that happen? The under 19s cricket team are really mixed, are very diverse. How did that happen?
Well, that's fine. That's what you want to have. You want to have the cream of the crop float to the top and end up in the teams like that.
Right.
And then when they play in there, they earn the credibility amongst one another. They perform well. They win the World Cup. They've got credibility. When you put people in there that haven't got credibility, that's when you get people being branded as quota players. And that is unsatisfactory to any sportsman that wants to play at the top level.
Well, can I come in there?
Yes, go ahead.
The problem is that the under-19 team, you give them 5 years. By the time you go the main professional team, they will have dwindled out. Hence, Brian Habana, Makhaya and Dini have complained about the institutional culture and some of the very subtle things which happen, which prevent them from rising to the very top.
All right, so gentlemen, this conversation is just bubbling up. I'm actually not stopping it. I'm just pausing it for a moment. I'm going to take you all to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. But before we go, there's so many issues in South Africa that need a lot of attention. It's been 20 years since the end of apartheid, and Nelson Mandela back in 2000 summed up why sport was so critical and so important for South Africa. I'm going to play you a little soundbite from him. I think it will make you understand why this conversation is so important.
Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination.
Nelson Mandela back in 2000 explained why sport was such a unifying force for South Africans. So I have two important things to tell you just at the very end of the program. Malika Palau is off on vacation. You will not see her for another 2 weeks. Goodbye. We will miss you.
Miss you also.
And almost as important as that, tomorrow's program. He's been called a pirate and eco-terrorist by his critics. I talk to the environmental activist Captain Paul Watson. Until then, see you online. Hello again, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We've been talking about racial transformation of sports teams in South Africa. Let me remind you who we have. Clive Rice, he's a former legendary cricket player. Somadado Fikeni, he is part of the chairman of the Eminent Persons Group on Sports Transformation, and Callie Creel is the CEO of AfriForum. It was just getting passionate. We're going to have a conversation about sport and race. Of course it's going to be a passionate conversation, so let's pick up. I was talking to some South African friends and they were telling me how the schools, and some of them are very integrated, but the richer schools have the sporting facilities and the poorer schools have absolutely nothing. So Callie Creel, how do we solve that issue? How do we kind of go forward? Because it seems to me that's where a lot of the talent is going to be, but if they can't afford to even practice and they have no equipment, how will you discover your future Chester Williams?
Yeah, I think you have a very strong point there. That should be the focus of us in this country, to say that we must look at, we must have an audit of rural communities, townships, poor areas, to find out what sporting facilities are available and what not. And then the municipalities or local government should play a strong role in providing these facilities. Fikeni, Samadoda Kenny mentioned in the main show just now that if you drive in the suburbs and you go to the rural communities, you see there's a difference in the facilities. That is true. That needs to be corrected. But unfortunately, we have in our country a situation where there's 246 million rand spent to revamp the president's personal home, while these things are not done. So I think government should get its priorities right.
Malika?
You know, it's interesting. On the one hand, we have people tweeting in something like this. Roscoe says that the minister has mistaken preference for bias in the terms of why certain races are in certain sports. He says, what other African country plays rugby? But then on Facebook, someone else raises what you just said, Femi. Bilal says, to play rugby, tennis, or golf, you need expensive kits, you need vast fields, you need coaches, and black South Africans don't have access to these as whites do. These opportunities should be equally provided to all. Clive, is that the issue here?
You're never going to provide it for all. In England, in the first world countries, they don't even do it there. You've got to be, just as Nelson Mandela said, you need to have the sportsman who are passionate about the sportsman, about their sport, running that sport, not the government. The government hasn't got an interest in it. All they want to do is get votes. And I'm afraid that until you get the sportsmen who are passionate about their sport running it, then you will start getting the players coming through, because they will identify the players that can make it and go through to the top. There's a huge amount that will play social sport, and there are a few that will play at the top. And until you get the passionate administrators doing that, then you will get something that works. The current system is an absolute flop.
So, Somadoda, the minister actually decided he wasn't going to take part in the conversation when he realised it was going to be a conversation, which is unfortunate. But I don't understand how 60-40 as a quota system is going to be implemented by May the 7th of this year. I don't get it. Can you explain?
Well, I do think that one thing that we're missing is that the minister, in meeting with the presidents of the Federation 2 days ago, said that he is inviting them to come forward, each code, with a plan on how they can realize this. He understands, as other government leaders understand, that it's not something that you wake up and do. And right. 80% of the effort should be on developing facilities. To that, I think we're all in agreement.
So do you think, do you think he's going to back down then? Because how realistic is it for all of your international teams, your big national teams in South Africa, to be 60-40 quota ready by May the 7th, which is election day, right?
No, I doubt there is such a targeted date. I'm still looking for that. All what we did as a professional body with academics, with people who have done sports psychology, sports, policy development, we have just advised government on a range of issues, including the review of the target itself And I listened very carefully in the meeting with the presidents of the federations, where it was said
What were
no
they saying?
one has any, no one, they all supported this actually.
Really?
But they were invited to come forward and say, this is what we can achieve at a given time. But the one situation that is untenable is to say, with a history like ours, apartheid history, which was declared as a crime against humanity,
Right.
50 years from independence, we would still have predominantly white or black sports. We need to have diversity.
Right.
How that is done, it would take a Calicri like Clive not just being critical, but saying, we hear you, let's sit down and find ways which will make our nation grow stronger as a sporting
Sure.
nation and still achieve that diversity.
Ah, that's interesting. I hear
You know
compromise
what?
there. Clive.
You know what? I'd love South Africa to be right in the forefront of what goes on. I don't mind whether it's black or white. The team can be completely black or completely white, as long as that team is winning and we're creating heroes amongst the community that people identify with and want to copy them. When we do that, then we will get players, black and white, coming through, copying the heroes.
Right. Okay. So.
But would you want to see transformation, though, which begin to reflect our diversity? Because right now the situation.
We'll never get a 60% diversity, because we've got about 95% of people haven't got the facilities to do it. So you're never going to achieve the 60%. But let's get the best talent that is there, that's out there in the market, and take them and put them at the top and get them to the top and create them as heroes amongst our communities all around South Africa. Then we will achieve something.
See, Clive, the thing with that is, and I don't want to start a whole lot of debate because we're going to have to take this conversation online. But the thing with that is, the players who are there are going to be the players who can afford, or the players who have access. So that, to me, is where sport used to be like a level playing field, but only if you've got access. Let's see what the community is saying to wrap up this conversation.
Well, I'll give you a good wrap. And this basically, it sums up what most people are saying, is that this has to start a lot younger. Right. So Robert says more needs to be done to increase racial diversity in youth sports, which we mentioned, but this could be a good starting point.
To Clive Rice, Callie Priel, Somadoda Fikeni, thank you for having this conversation with us. It gives us a sense of what's going on in the sporting world in South Africa. It kind of reflects what's going on in the society as well. I'm going to leave you with a very upbeat picture. This is South Africa under 19 cricket team, and what a beautiful Rainbow Nation cricket team they happen to be. So, meanwhile, let's talk about the next AJ stream. He's been called a pirate and eco-terrorist by his critics. We'll talk to the environmental activist Captain Paul Watson about protecting our oceans, his fight against whaling, and his eco-adventures. Tweet us your questions for him to #AJstream. Malika Bilal will not be answering those questions. She'll be off on a holiday.
I might tweet you, though.
All right. I will track you down. Enjoy.
Thank you.
I will be with Omar Badar tomorrow. Thanks for watching.